everyone. So in this video, we're going to go ahead and talk about some negative rules. Now, the reason I like to start off with negative rules is oftentimes students struggle with the negatives and it persists throughout their entire algebra course. So I think it's really important to get these down concrete because you're going to see them throughout your class. So we're going to talk about the differences between adding and subtracting rules, and then with multiplying and dividing rules as well. So they're going to have a different set of rules, so we're going to try to differentiate the two, and then do a couple of calculations using our handy dandy calculator. So make sure you got whatever calculator you have at home. It doesn't have to be a graphing. It can be scientific. Just make sure you have it handy so we can learn how to use this as well, and that can be a huge asset in the future. So let's begin by talking about adding two negatives together. So when you're adding a negative and a positive number, one negative, one positive, the answer is going to be the sign of the larger number. So think of it this way. When you're adding and subtracting, think of money, okay? Positive money means you have that money. That's great. Negative money means you either owe that money or you're losing that amount of money. So you're paying that out. Gain versus loss. So when you're thinking about adding numbers, really keep that in mind, the money idea. Okay. Another way to think of one negative and one positive is almost as a subtraction problem because it's the same idea. Addition and subtraction are buddies. They relate to one another. So let's begin with 8 plus negative 3. So you're doing an addition problem, but it's saying you're starting off with $8 and then you're adding a negative 3, which is the same thing as saying, let's get some color up here, 8 minus 3. Okay, these two are the same idea. 8 plus a negative 3 is the same thing as taking $8 and taking away 3, which if you have $8, you take away 3, you're left with 5. Now, let's look at it a different way. Okay, how about negative 9 plus 2? Well, there's a couple things to notice about this. The first thing is that think of it as I'm down $9. I owe somebody $9, okay? And I'm giving them $2. That means I owe them 2 less, which means you would be at 9 minus 2 is going to be 7. But since your larger number is a negative, that's what you're going to end with. Okay? Whatever number is larger, that's the sign that you're going to have. In our first example, the 8 was larger, so your answer was positive. Okay, since the larger number was a positive number. So it's whatever number is larger when you're adding a negative and a positive. Okay, so 5 plus negative 6. Again, you're taking a positive and you're adding a negative value. Same thing as subtraction, you're finding the difference between these two numbers. So this is the same thing as 5 minus 6. So you have $5 and you lose $6, meaning you're down $1, okay, because you don't have enough to compensate that $5, those $6, so you're down $1. Okay, you're losing money. This isn't a good thing. Don't do that. Okay, so here's another example where you have negative 4 and plus 7. So you're down $4, but then you find $7 on the street. How much are you up? Well, we have to take away 4. Okay, that negative almost implies taking it away. It does imply that. Taking away $4 from 7, which would leave you with $3. So you're up $3. We chose to make it positive since the larger number is positive. So really look at which number is larger. That sign is going to be your answer. Okay. So one thing about mathematics is make sure you are finding a way that you understand it. Is it the money example? Is it just remembering that the larger number is the sign that you have to go with? Make sure you're understanding it in a way that works for you and then going on forward with that. Okay, So let's talk about adding two negatives. Now this is part of this is a subject that people struggle with because they confuse it with another rule. So let's try to differentiate that. When you're adding two negatives, think of it as you already owe the bank money and now you're taking out more money, meaning that you're becoming more and more negative, or you're losing more and more money, right? So adding two negatives just means it becomes a larger negative, okay? Adding two negatives becomes a larger negative. You're getting further into debt. So here, -8 plus -3, both are negative numbers. We're adding them together, meaning that it's going to be a larger negative. So 8 plus 3 is 11, okay? Since they're both negatives, we're going to end with that negative number when we're adding. Okay. You're down 8, you lose $3 more. That means you're down a total of $11. Okay, same thing here. Just notice the parentheses could be there, but they don't have to be there. I just wanted to show you different variations of how you could see it throughout the week. So -5 plus -6, both are negative numbers. We're going to be adding them together. So it's going to become a larger negative. This one is actually -11 as well. Okay. I'm really varying up the answers here. Okay. So we're still talking about addition and subtraction, but with subtraction, you're going to have those same ideas. We have to be careful when we're subtracting negatives because it can switch the sign. So when you are subtracting a negative, meaning there are two negatives right next door to each other, it actually turns into a positive. Think of it as you're in the car and you're reversing and you're reversing again. It's almost like a double negative. You're undoing it. When you have a negative and a negative, you're undoing those operations and turning it into a positive, okay? Like in English class when they tell you do not write, we do not write there, okay? So instead of writing the two negatives, we're going to turn that into a positive. So this is the simplest one. It's just 8 minus 3. There's two positive numbers that you're subtracting. 8 minus 3 is 5. Okay, boring. Great. You have $8. You're taking away 3. You're left with 5. Now this one we have a -9 and we're taking away $2 more. Now be careful here because you have -9 or you owe $9 and then you're taking away 2 more, meaning that you're going to become more into debt. So this is the same rule as adding two negatives. There's two negatives that we're adding there, meaning that it's going to become a larger negative. And so this will become -11. Remember as you're going through these rules that, as I stated before, it's best to understand these in a way that works for you because you want to have that fast retention. So just make sure you're practicing these rules throughout the quarter and always coming back to this video, maybe re-watching it if you want a quick review. So the next one is where we have that subtracting a negative. So you see here we're subtracting a negative value. When we're subtracting a negative, those are that double negative that turns into a positive. It turns into 5 plus 6, which we can do that piece of cake, which is just a +11. So whenever you have those two negatives right next to each other, a subtraction and a negative, we're going to turn that into a plus. Okay, so this one's really complicated. The first thing I want you to notice is we are subtracting a negative, which we can actually convert here to a +7. Now the -4 doesn't get changed because it's still -4. There's no double negative in front of the 4, so we just leave it as -4. And then we can just use our addition rules here. -4 plus 7, find the difference between the two, which is 3. Which one's larger? 7 is, so it's going to stay positive. We use the sign of the larger number. Okay, that was adding and subtracting. where you just pay attention to the larger number sign. You're finding the difference between the two. When we switch to multiplying and dividing, the rules change, okay? Multiplying and dividing have the same rules, but they have different rules than addition and subtraction. So make sure you're keeping those into two different categories, addition and subtraction, multiplying and dividing. So let's start with multiplying or dividing. One negative, one positive. If there's one negative and one positive number that you're multiplying, your answer will always be negative. The negative kind of takes over the whole situation. Okay, it's the controlling one. Now, if you are multiplying or dividing two negatives, your answer is going to turn positive. And this is similar to the subtracting negative where we combine and make them positive. Similar to that. Two negatives turn into a positive, one negative, one positive stay negative. Okay. So 8 times negative 3. There's one positive and one negative. So 8 times 3 is 24. Since there's one negative being multiplied, our answer stays negative. Okay, here we have negative 9 times negative 2. Notice I'm using different symbols to represent multiplication. That's just to get used to the way we write multiplication as we get into algebra, because we try to steer clear of this X to indicate multiplication, simply because that will be confusing when we actually use variables. So just a heads up. Negative 9 times negative 2. Two negatives turn it into a positive 18. I like to write the positive there just to indicate to me as I'm looking back in my notes that we purposely changed that into a positive. Here, this is another multiplication problem. Note when there's a number next to a parenthesis, it's actually a multiplication, okay? It's assumed multiplication if we don't see an operation there. So negative 5 times negative 6, two negatives multiplied are going to turn into a positive, and this will turn into a positive 30. Okay, negative 6 divided by 3. So we're switching to division problems, but they have the same rules as multiplication. Here we have one negative and one positive, so that means our answer will be negative. Negative 6 divided by 3 is negative 2. And then 8 divided by negative 4. 8 divided by negative 4, that's going to be a 2. Since there's one positive, one negative, we should make that a negative 2. Here we have negative 12 divided by negative 4. Notice I didn't mention this before, but usually we don't write the division sign. We usually just keep it as a fraction to symbolize division. So whenever you see that fraction, that's actually just division. You're taking the top divided by the bottom. So negative 12 divided by negative 4. 12 divided by 4 is 3. And since we have two negatives, we're going to turn it into a positive value. So that's just a quick demonstration of those rules for multiplying and dividing with your negatives. Let's go through and just summarize the whole thing and make sure we're tying these ideas together. So make sure you're careful with your negatives. This is the number one problem I do see as I go through our class together. Take an extra second, slow down, go through, make sure you're doing that positive and negative as well. If it's adding and subtraction, go through the money example. If it's multiplying and dividing, make sure you're using those two rules we have for negatives, okay? And keep in mind they have two separate rules for each of them. In the long run, if you slow down and take your time with the negatives, it will make your life better. You'll become faster at it. It takes time though. Quick note on your calculator, I see sometimes this can be a problem. Usually the negative button is different than your subtraction button. So here is our subtraction button. This is a TI-30X2S. This is just a quick scientific cheat scientific calculator that does a great job for algebra, basic algebra. But this one, you see the subtraction sign, and let me use a different color so you can actually see it. That'd be great. Okay, so the subtraction sign is right there. And the negative number, the negative button is right here. So there are actually two different things, and if you type it in a certain way into your calculator, it won't necessarily work. Some calculators are finicky about it. They're just picky, you know. So make sure you're identifying. Grab your calculator. Notice, oh, here's my subtraction. Here's my negative button. I got to be sure to use the correct button on that. Okay? So make sure you're practicing that. Check your calculator and always come back to these rules if you're struggling with those negatives. So good luck, and I'll see you in our next video.